everyone. Welcome back to the Launch School podcast. Today we are interviewing Benjamin Walker. And so far this season, we've had a lot of capstone grad interviews. So we're trying to fit in a few student interviews just to kind of bridge that gap and get some exposure for what it's like at the time as a student in Launch School. And Benjamin has an interesting situation and is a great student. So we're excited to have him. Hi, Benjamin.
Hello, Brandi. Thank you for having me.
Great. How are you doing?
Super. I'm doing great.
Great. Thanks for being here. I think the first thing we wanted to talk about is just getting to know you a little bit in terms of like what type of student you are here at Launch School, maybe why you chose Launch School. Are you full-time studying, part-time studying? What's the deal?
Yeah. So I was a high school mathematics teacher for a dozen years. And
wow.
I'm in my mid 30s. And so I started right out of college teaching at schools, and loved teaching for a long time. Once my partner and I had our first child, our daughter, who right now is not quite 2.5, we decided that we wanted a change in our life. And the biggest change was that I was going to change careers from being a classroom teacher in the public schools in the city of Chicago, which is where we live. And I wanted to, close that chapter of my life and open this new chapter eventually as a software engineer. My partner is in software engineering, and then she's been promoted to technical project manager and things like that, product owner, over her tenure as an engineer. So then I wanted to move into similar work, but I think I'm gonna try to stay in the engineering. First, I need to become an engineer after Launch School, but I think I'm more interested in the pure engineering, whereas she's more a manager of people. But I found Launch School when I was looking for, a way to change careers, and so I looked at universities and boot camps, and then Launch School kind of in its own thing, and I was really excited by my ability to move through core at my own pace. So your question about, am I full-time, part-time, what am I doing? So the way I describe myself these days is that I am a full-time dada and a part-time student, because my daughter calls me dada. So I'm a full-time parent and a part-time student. And that works really well for our family right now. And I'm just so grateful that my partner and I are in a position in our life where I can actually completely step back from my job and from earning income for our family. And, she continues to work. And then I kind of do the whole like child care, run the house type stuff. It's great. And then in the mornings, the way that we do it is our daughter goes to preschool just in the mornings from like 8:15 to noon. And during that time, most of the time is when I'm doing my studies. So very part-time. I have my goal is to get 3 hours and 15 minutes to 3 hours and 45 minutes per day, 5 days a week. So it comes out to about like 17 hours per week. So I would describe that as very part-time, but it's because I get the full-time joy of being with my 2-year-old.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So I think a question that a lot of parents might have is, are you progressing through the curriculum as you would like to? As I tell people a lot, if you can get a little bit of studying in every day, that's almost better than more study time once a week. So do you feel good about your progress?
I do. I feel really, really good about our progress or my progress through the curriculum. Being a parent is, a life-changing experience. What I'll say about it as it relates to Launch School is that the focus on your child's life, or like when one becomes a parent, one's focus on their child's life is just kind of, it's kind of the most important thing. So I have a goal for about 3.5 hours per day, 5 days a week. And do I always hit that goal? No, because, my daughter is 2 and, we just got her ear tubes, which is like a thing that doctors will give kids if they have a lot of ear infections, which our daughter did. She got sick like every 3 weeks for her whole year of being 1 year old. And so, now that she has ear tubes, she's much more frequently healthy. But during the time that she was before ear tubes and everything, she, I would just not be able to, she would be home with me a lot, right? Because, you don't send a sick kid to daycare or whatever.
Yeah.
So she would be home with me a lot, and that's okay. I mean, if I had been, it would have been really difficult if I were in a program where I didn't have the flexibility to just stay home with her and really hardly get much done for school that day. If I had been enrolled at the University of Chicago or something, that class would have happened. Yeah. Whether or not I was in that classroom. So in a lot of ways, this really filled my needs for, the things that people join launch school for is like the flexibility. And, and I think what's nice to do it is like, I try to have very clear goals and priorities and then try to stick to them as best I can. But also like when you're a parent, like I am, you just have to embrace this general mentality of, you do the best you can when you can do it. But if your kid is sick or, whatever, like you just have to, you take care of your kid. That's it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you're very flexible, but that's kind of the perk of launch school is that flexibility. So let's see, you're a parent, you're busy, you're flexible. What course are you in? Just to give people some context.
Sure. Yeah. I'm in Ruby 1. I'm in the end of 175 right now, Ruby 175. So that is like, I'm doing the CMS project and I'm about to go into like the database course, which is kind of like, I think the last 3 courses of the Ruby track before I get to front end.
Yeah, I think 175 is where things start to really come together in the back end. So far, it's been a lot of like random tools and you're like, where do these fit together? And now things are starting to fit together.
Yeah, I agree. It's been a wonderfully fulfilling and very challenging course for me. Much more. So I think things are coming together in more ways than I realized they could. So at first I was like, what does all this stuff happen? Like, what's going on? And then at the beginning of the course, I had to use the solutions much more than I was used to, having to use the solutions to projects or problems. And now that I'm kind of like in the tail end of it and in the CMS project and about to be done with that, I'm able to write up like all of the solutions and testing almost entirely by myself, which is very gratifying. But it was a huge shift, like the beginning of 175 to the end, kind of as you would expect, right? But it's been a huge shift and a very challenging and gratifying course.
Awesome. Well, you're nearing the end of the back-end curriculum. So let's pivot a little bit because I want to talk about something else. When I started reaching out to students for this idea, I had a few things in mind. I wanted to talk to parents. I wanted to talk to, maybe some students who had gotten not yet, overcome setbacks. And when you filled out the interest form, you actually said, I have ADHD and I'm happy to talk about that. And I think that's great because a lot of people out there are probably wondering, with whatever learning disability, can I sit down at a computer and study like this? Can I do this text-based material? So how was that for you deciding to do launch school and how do you manage your ADHD?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I am really happy to talk about ADHD. I was diagnosed in college, which is a little bit later than some people. They're often identified maybe in middle school or high school. And then I continue to live with ADHD as an adult. And it's taken me a while to get to, I used to think of it as a deficit. And now, thanks to some good friends of mine who have helped me talk about it more. At first, I felt really awkward talking about it and like kind of embarrassed maybe, even though intellectually I knew that, being neurodiverse is not like quote unquote my fault or like I couldn't control that, right? There's nothing that I could do that would make me neurotypical or neurodiverse like that. It's just completely out of your hands, right? And so now, thanks to several of my friends outside of launch school, but I've made a couple of friends inside launch school who are also neurodiverse, and it's just great to be able to talk about that with people. But I tend instead now of seeing it as a as a as a not a detriment, but as like a deficit. Instead, I tend to see having ADHD as kind of a superpower. I mean, like the superpower is that like being able to focus really intensely on one thing at a time is a thing that it comes really easily for some people with ADHD. I guess I'll preface this that like people with ADHD, there's a huge spectrum for how it affects them and how they engage with material and what types of things they find distracting or not distracting, what types of medications may help or whatever. So I'll just speak from my own experience as a dude with ADHD, but I think of it as a really cool thing about me. Like one thing is like I have ADHD, which is like hyperactive, I guess, which just means I'm full of energy, which is great for parenting, by the way. So, so side note is just like it's wonderful to have lots of energy and always be able to keep up with my little sweetie because she wants to run around and play and jump and whatever. It really helps to. I mean, first of all, it just helps that I'm doing school only for a handful of hours a day, but I was definitely nervous before I started school before I started launch school because I was able to be successful with prescribed medication. I take a thing called Adderall, which is a psychostimulant, changes the brain chemistry for people with ADHD to basically give them like, if for those of our listeners that are not familiar with like what ADHD is or how Adderall works, it's a stimulant and it adds, I forget exactly what, but like norepinephrine and dopamine and maybe serotonin, to basically make my brain chemistry like more similar to a person who's neurotypical, and then focusing isn't as hard. And actually, it like when I'm on my prescribed medication, it feels like I can like really do the text-based work. The coding feels really fun, and problem solving for me like is something that I can kind of like almost not ease into, but like something I'm like looking forward to. And I can like dive right in and be really engrossed in that. But I was nervous because, sometimes for me with ADHD, if I'm by myself and I don't have like a person or a group of people to focus on, then I can get really distracted really easily. So it has taken a lot of practice because when I was a teacher, I was able to teach class great because I had a whole group of students. I'm responsible for their learning. I'm responsible for everything going on in the class. So it's very easy to keep my focus. But when it's just me and it's like me and like a text-based lesson or a video lesson, it can be, I can kind of like become really distracted. And so it's definitely taken some practice. I would say for people who are considering, doing launch school, maybe they have ADHD, I'm not sure how well this generalizes to other types of neurodiversity, but I would just say like give yourself a grace period and like be gentle with yourself as you learn a new set of skills. For me, it was a huge change from being in charge of a classroom to just being in charge of like my own lesson with me and a computer screen. It definitely helps to study with others. I will be, the 10,000th launch school student that says, wow, it really helps to study with others, to have a group of people that you see on a regular basis and you can talk things out and help each other with questions and even just like put stuff into words. The spot sessions are really helpful, but there was definitely I would say I'm still in a growth process of figuring out how to be a solo student. I mean, I'm not a solo student, right? I have like a bunch of friends. By a bunch, I mean like, 6 or 7 like close friends that I study with frequently, and I really like them, and they really help me a lot, and hopefully I help them too. But it's just been a long process of making this transition, a whole new set of skills of being a solo learner with ADHD. And I would say, I've actually studied with a couple people, one person in particular who also had ADHD. And she described feeling really just struggling with this experience of ADHD, like maybe that the launch school the type of work that we were doing, the type of assessments did not really lend themselves well to his experience of being a student with ADHD. But he also said that, studying with another person who is neurodiverse really helped him. And I think part of it is just like, nobody likes to feel isolated, right? Like nobody wants to, as much as there is this trope about like software engineers, like being really like turned inward and not having good emotional skills, which I definitely somewhat fulfill-ish. But I think like it's good to seek out a space where you can talk about even how you're feeling, right? Like I think for him, it really helped him say, because I got a not yet a while ago in the, what is it, Ruby 119, the live assessment, the interview assessment. And so that was a difficult experience. I know you're talking with a lot of other people about not yet, but then after I passed that, then I reached out kind of to like all of launch school and was like, hey, I got a not yet, here's what I learned. I'm more than happy to study with people. If you're prepping for the live interview, I'd be really happy to help you prep. Like I learned a lot from my not yet experience. And now that I've passed it, I'm happy to kind of pay that forward. Cause a lot of people helped me get to the point where I passed the 119 interview. So then I was trying to like, pay it forward. And so I forget how many, a lot of people reached out. I think I did like mock interviews with like 13 or 15 people that I'd never met.
They're like, you'll mock interview me? Yes, please.
Yeah, totally. And it's great. I really loved it. I mean, the funniest experience about that, this is kind of a side note, but the funniest experience was like how many people they were like, yeah, will you mock it? Like, give me a mock interview. And I was giving them a mock interview, and it was just so clear as they were doing these problems that they were so much better at coding than I was, even though I had already passed the assessment and they had not. They were like, yeah, I just don't know if I'm ready. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you're
so ready.
You're obscenely ready. Like you need to go take this.
You were ready last month.
Yeah. Get off this call right now and go schedule the interview. Just schedule the interview. And they're like, well, I don't know. And I'm like, no, please. Like you gotta understand. And it's not like they were being, like what they were doing was completely understandable. This isn't to say that those people were like weird or wrong. It's just like, it's a new skill, right? So you don't know how prepared you need to be. So it's completely understandable that they didn't know that they were very fully prepared because they really hadn't done an interview like that before. So, right, like just to be clear, I'm not like making fun of those people that were over prepared. And I was happy to be in a position where I'm like, look, I took this assessment, you definitely have so many skills. You are ready to go take this assessment. But anyway, sorry, this all to say that during that sweep of interviews, I connected with another person with ADHD, and honestly, I barely helped him with the coding, but I think he told me this is why I know that he said to me that it just made him feel so much better and confident having talked to another student with ADHD that could kind of relate to his experience that he found really challenging and isolating. So I would just say like, just speaking for myself, but having this experience with connecting with at least one other person, two other people actually who are neurodiverse, it's just nice to talk about it, right? Like it feels good to others to be able to talk about it. And sometimes it's not even like the curriculum needs to change or the assessment needs to change, or like that would be on the launch school side. And sometimes it's not even that like the student needs to change or like learn a skill better or do more practice. Sometimes it really is just, it's nice to connect with somebody else who's kind of going through a similar thing, and like just feeling that connection can put you in a place where, you like put me in a place where I feel less anxious or I feel less jittery or I feel less insecure. And then like, okay, like I've made this connection with somebody else who also has this developmental disability that I have too. And now I just feel like a sense of confidence that I didn't have before. And like, I don't really know what the science is behind it, but I just know that it's a real thing. Like sometimes connecting with people on a personal level, puts you in a better place to do better intellectual work, even if the connection you made with a person is not intellectual, right? It's just like the social emotional connection of like, oh yeah, man, like I have ADHD too. Yeah, that is hard, right? Like the timing thing, right? It's so stressful. Like, oh, it's stressful out of my mind. And he was like, right, like it was just that type of connection. So yeah, like it also made me think, because you had brought this up earlier, Brandi, that maybe like a neurodiverse channel is a place where people could find connections. And I think that's a really good idea. I had worked on an article. It's like a mental note for me to finish that article and push it out, because just having somebody be like, hey, I have ADHD and I think it's really dope. And, maybe not everything is the easiest because of it, but it's kind of this cool thing that we have or that I have and that, I've found that we can work through it, kind of thing. That's a good idea. The more people talk about it, the better, I think, is what I'm trying to say about.
Totally.
And so, like, for people who are neurotypical, to just, I don't have any like straight up advice for people, but just like having Launch School be a community where, just the idea that one could be neurodiverse or could be neurotypical is helpful, right? It's just like nice for people to think that. It's like, you can ask or you can talk about it or feel free to share or whatever. It's just nice to have that on people's radar.
It is a learning curve, right? And I think that's something, whether or not you're neurodiverse or neurotypical, not to minimize that, but that everyone coming into Launch School is on a learning curve. I think people show up and they see, Benjamin in RB 175, and he's posting this thing, and I don't know what he's talking about, but it seems really cool. And look, 10 people replied to him. He has this figured out. But they don't realize that, in RB 101, you were sitting there in the same shoes going, who are these people? Everyone's so confident. Everyone's learning. Like, how do I fit into this? And so there's a learning curve with everyone, especially since I know very few people who have experience with mastery-based learning before Launch School. And very few people, more so than mastery-based learning, but also few people who have done online learning. And even with online learning, I think most Launch School students are the only person they know in real life who are doing Launch School. Yeah. So you talk to your friends and family and you're kind of like, yeah, I'm doing this thing. And they're like, so is it a degree? And you're like, well, no. But explaining it to other people, right? It's hard. And so I think it's a good perspective for people to just see that it's a learning curve at the beginning, and to, like you said, have grace with yourself. And I think some people have higher expectations or are more of a perfectionist. So being willing to try and fail, and, it doesn't take away from your success as a student and the student that you are working on becoming, right?
Right. I think that's very insightful, Brandi. I would also say, I think I was going for before to be like maybe 100% on every assessment. I think what I've done now is like, I want to pass with a 94 on everything, only because in one assessment or like a couple assessments, I got 100%, and I had that feeling of being over prepared. And like, to be clear, I got 100% on like whatever assessment, but I also got a not yet before. So I'm not saying like I'm the best student ever or anything. But just like, I think the sweet spot for me is like a 94, where it's like, I still hold myself accountable to the learning. I mean, actually a better way to say this is, and I wrote this down in my notes before we talked, is that I want to own my understanding and my education. I don't want it to own me, right? So that when I move through a course, I am not held hostage by like these ideas that like, oh yeah, like we kind of did these ideas in this course and I didn't really quite understand it. Like that's just, I'm not moving on if that's the case, right? But I think I can like be pretty solid on the content at a 94% level, pass the assessment, and whatever I got wrong, figure out and submit the revisions, right? And I like keep track of this own stuff just for myself. It's like, what did I miss? To see if there's trends or whatever. But I try not to go for 100%, only because I think for me, it kind of slows me down in a way that is less productive. There's some type of like diminishing returns rule at play here. And like 94% seems like the sweet spot, where if I get a grade lower than that, like I was unprepared and I shouldn't have taken the assessment. But anyway, that's my personal opinion that I think can kind of be a healthy
progress
sweet
over
spot.
Perfection.
Yes.
Yeah, I think in a lot of big companies, in software companies, actually, they have this thing that they say that if you aren't making any mistakes, then you're not moving fast enough, right? Yeah. And that makes sense to me. I feel like a lot of people could use that advice here at Launch School, that you're not going to be perfect. You're not going to make mistakes. Shoot for the stars, but be okay when you land on that A instead of the A plus. It's okay. And you don't want to stay with the material until you hate it, right? You don't want to resent object-oriented programming by the time you take the assessment, right? You want to learn the tools and then move on and then use those tools and continue learning. But it's okay to, try, right?
It is.
Yeah. Great. Well, let's talk about just one more thing because I'm really curious. I think it's a compliment when a teacher of 12 years chooses launch school. So what was your take on launch school as someone who spent so much time in education?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, I think it's what drew me to launch school was the philosophical framework around which launch school is built. Or maybe perhaps on top of which is a better way to describe that. And we at my school where I taught in Chicago, I taught at this wonderful school, Peyton College Prep, and it's a fantastic public school in the city. And we taught our math courses at Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2 with mastery-based learning.
Oh, really?
Essentially the exact same concept and philosophy behind launch school's mastery-based learning. And we had, a different grading structure or whatever for the kids to move through, but it was the same thing where, you had multiple opportunities to show proficiency in the work, and that your grade could change from an 80% to a 90% and then a 90% to 100 if you demonstrated that evidence over time. And just how that is that makes a lot of sense where, the ways that we learn is, you learn a little bit over time and then a little bit more. And then sometimes you circle back and relearn that stuff in other courses. And that's really helpful. But it's just a very, I really respected that launch school took this approach of we are not going to move at one pace because that optimizes for the convenience of the teachers and the school. It does not optimize for the learning and the performance of the students. So what we're going to do instead is move at the pace that is appropriate for the student and not move on until they have mastered the necessary skills to move on in a way that makes sense, right? And this is nice. This is something that mathematics, which is what I primarily taught when I was a teacher, and software engineering, is that these skills that you learn in previous classes build on themselves over time.
They're cumulative, yeah.
They are cumulative, and so it makes a lot of sense to have it that way. So I love that. I love, Chris seems like I know him a little bit. We've had a couple of chats, and he just seems like a wonderful and thoughtful guy who is committed to transparency and running a school in an ethical manner that is dedicated to student outcomes and student performance and student experience. I really appreciate an organization that is built around this idea of there's no shortcuts to do something really hard and really meaningful. And I feel that really resonates with me. And it was also University of Chicago, which is where I live in Hyde Park in Chicago. University of Chicago doesn't have a self-paced program, and I really want to be present with my daughter. So again, the structure of it is nice, but I love that there's also Capstone that is more of a traditional classroom setting where there's actual synchronous classes and that type of thing. That seems really, it seems like a nice balance of what is going to help me get a job, but also fit well with my priorities in my life right now. So yeah, I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to continue this process and learn. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, thanks.
I think I have just one more question, and that is, were there any difficulties that you had going from a teacher to a student? I imagine that might have been hard.
Yeah. No, it was mostly just liberating, Brandi.
You're no, what a relief.
It is. It really, it's so joyful, right? It's I mean, don't get me wrong. Like being a teacher is joyful. I loved my job. My kids were always amazing. Every year, no matter what, I taught at 3 different schools over my time. The kids are always so great, but it is. I mean, teaching is a great job because it is so demanding and intellectually engaging and challenging, and that's a very fulfilling career.
It's what makes it not a great job at the same time, I guess.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So,
it's demanding and exhausting.
Yeah, it is. And so when I was like 20s and young 30s, I was like, cool, this feels good. This is the right fit for what I want to do with my life right now. And then, like I said, with becoming a parent, I have a different set of priorities, and my family became number one. My daughter, our daughter became number one. So yeah, it just felt liberating. I mean, it felt liberating and joyful. I mean, don't get me wrong, being a student is challenging, but the transition from being a teacher to being a student just felt really joyful. It just felt so fun and like liberating to be responsible for myself. And I had, honestly, it was a great, I mean, what better job to have before being a student is like teaching other people to be good students, right? Like so much of my job was not teaching calculus, even though I taught calculus most of the years I was a teacher. What I'm actually teaching is like teaching children, high schoolers, to develop good structures and habits to help them own their own learning, right? That idea of owning learning does not come from me, but it comes from my background as a teacher. And I will say, is it okay if I share a couple of ideas real quick about ADHD?
Sure.
Real quick? So just, is that a little out of order, but hopefully it doesn't matter, is that what really helped me not just make progress as a person with ADHD, because like oftentimes people with ADHD need to develop executive functioning skills. They have to put I've had to put a lot more work into developing executive functioning skills well into adulthood. And I think disproportionately more work than my neurotypical peers. So like no shame. I say this with like laughing a little bit, but no shame that I didn't really use a calendar in my life until I was 22, 23 years old. Like professionally, I did use a calendar in school, but that was just for schoolwork. But then I didn't like use a calendar in my life until I was 23. So, and like, you know what, if you don't use a calendar now and you're 30 or 40 or whatever, like who cares? Like plenty of people don't, but if you have ADHD and you don't yet, that's a really powerful tool. But what we do before we dive into the calendar is my partner and I dive into our priorities for the week. And anybody could do this, right? It's just like figure out what you want your ideal week to look like. And so like how many hours a week and how many times per week. So like how many days a week are you going to be exercising? Were you cooking? When are you eating? Like this type of ticky-tacky, like, I have to remember to eat here. Like a neurotypical person might think like, wait, what are you talking about? Like plan eating? Yeah. But for a person with ADHD, especially if they're on prescribed medication like Adderall or these other stimulants, it's easy to forget to eat actually. Like I can't tell you how many times we call the microwave in my house the hidey hole, because I'll like put my lunch in the microwave.
You put stuff in and leave it there?
Well, because I forget, because I'm like, I'm like in the middle of a project or a problem or whatever. And then like, it finishes heating up the soup or whatever, but then I just forget about it. And then like at 4
like,
p.m.
Benjamin, did you eat lunch? And like, no, it's in the hidey hole.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, I've gotten better at that over the years, but I'm just saying like that is if anybody's wondering like, what is it like a day in the life of a dude with ADHD? It's like I forget to eat a lot. And so that's in my calendar, right? And like meal prepping and exercise and like fun time, outdoor time, like whatever fills your cup. Because the thing that I found is if I don't fill the other needs in my life, like exercise is a big one for me, then I can't show up fully present in my studies. And so what I do is I don't think of like, just like for these 6 hours, I'm going to plan like what I'm going to do for the first 2 hours and what I'm going to do for the next 2 hours. But I plan the whole week, because I think being a successful student is being a successful whole person and taking a look at your holistic approach to how you're building your life or how you're organizing your life can really lead to success in being a student. And so when I have those 3 hours a day or whatever it is, this is why earlier I said like 3 hours and 15 minutes to 3 hours and 45 minutes, depending on the day.
Yeah, that was very specific.
Right. So like the reason it's specific is executive functioning and ADHD. Yeah. And so if I don't have a plan, it's easy for like, just, I don't know, for me personally, it's just easy for the hours to like disappear and I didn't even see them happening. And that's not what we want, like an intentional life can be a really well-lived life. So having that, setting priorities first and then building your calendar to match your priorities, not the other way around. Got to do priorities first is really helpful.
Right.
And then, like I said earlier, I have 7 close friends and everybody tells you to go to the spot sessions, but guess where I met most of those friends is the spot sessions. Right. And some of them I actually met when I was like, hey, I passed this thing. I'll help you pass. Not, I got a not yet. And then I passed. Let me help you pass. Like, yeah, I think like 3 of the people I worked with from that have become really close friends of mine. So anyway, that's like a shout out to these things that kind of everybody says, but it leads to real connections. Too. Yeah, I say too. I am the 1,000th person to say, go to the spot sessions. They're really helpful.
That's great advice for anyone, add another layer of structure on top of the structure that Launch School gives us, especially in that self-paced environment, especially if you're neurodiverse and sometimes struggle with motivation or feeling overwhelmed, maybe,
totally.
Stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much, Benjamin. I think this has been great. It's really good for students, I think, to see the real person behind the student who is, about halfway through the core curriculum and, someone that they can relate to and realize that, whatever your situation, most of us are not the exception. Most of us can do this, and it might take some systems. It might take, a calendar on top of your calendar, but we can do it. And thanks so much for sharing your story.
Thank you so much for having me, Brandi. This has been really fun. And awesome. I've always looked up to you as a TA. I really respect you. And I'm so glad that you asked me to be interviewed. Thank you.
Thank you for the kind words. Awesome. Yeah. Have a good one, Benjamin.
Okay, great.
Okay. Bye.